Good afternoon. My name is Fraser O'Leary. I'm the chair of the Teacher Retention Committee on the DC State Board of Education. I'm the Ward 4 representative. Along with me today are Darren Fleischer, who is a policy analyst, Alexander Jew, who is the policy analyst and the person who's responsible for our Teacher Retention Committee, and Simone Wright, who's running the whole show today. I'd like to welcome all of you. I am a retired teacher from DCPS. I retired in September in 2017 after 47 years of teaching English. And I also teach at the University of the District of Columbia. Having teachers stay in our wonderful profession has always been of extreme importance to me. And our report has highlighted several of the major reasons why teachers leave. We welcome your input today. Thank you all for coming, and I hope that you will be educated by us. So the goals are to interpret and analyze the DC State Board's teacher attrition survey data and its findings, and to develop a narrative about why teachers are leaving classrooms, schools, and/or sectors in the District of Columbia, both in the public and the public charter schools, and for us to brainstorm and discuss next steps and solutions to address teacher attrition in the district. Now we're going to have a wonderful video that was put together by the staff of the State Board of Education, and I hope that you'll sit back, relax, and enjoy listening to teachers and students and other members who are concerned with teachers leaving our profession.
When a teacher leaves, it's suddenly like a student has to regain that relationship they had with the previous teacher. And midway through the year, when they're in the middle of learning and they're in the middle of their course, they now have to establish this relationship again.
My teacher left in the beginning of the year, and for the first month or so, we didn't really have anybody in the class, and it was more like just other staff members watching over the class. When we went to our next grade, we was a little stuck.
The gaps in their knowledge would widen. I've seen this specifically at my school since I teach 11th and 12th grade students.
Sometimes losing that resource is a little bit more difficult than just now somebody's not teaching 3rd or 4th grade. Now it's like, all right, I lost one of my go-to people when it comes to using technology.
We go home at night thinking of our students and how we can help them. And it takes a toll.
I don't really need much from my administrators or from my coaches or from my colleagues, but what I do want, or what I would like consistently, is touch and check-ins.
We know that teachers who are underprepared or do not get substantial support in clinical practice in their preparation are 2 to 3 times as likely to leave the profession.
What teachers need is that kind of intensive coaching or mentoring. Principals are really a key factor in supporting teachers and in helping retain them. Schools with the greatest needs, the most disadvantaged populations, tend to have more turnover, and not just higher rates of turnover of teachers, but also of principals.
A lot of the students from those low-income risk neighborhoods, they don't understand what real stability is. When teacher attrition happens, they feel like someone's abandoned them again. It feels just like their grandmother or their mother or their father or their uncle or, somebody that they looked up to in the community.
When teachers keep turning over, it just perpetuates the cycle of students feeling like, oh, well, we can't trust them. Oh, they're just going to leave. Why bother?
My daughter used to go to my charter school. And when I was thinking about where she would go for kindergarten, I was realizing that I wasn't sure who was going to be her kindergarten teacher at my charter school.
It kind of feels like someone left your team. So then also the morale of the staff, teachers and admin kind of goes down because, well, now there's no other adult that wanted to stay here for the rest of the year.
We can't create impactful solutions unless we fully understand the problem.
We have one of the highest rates of teacher attrition in the United States in both the public and the public charter schools.
We don't make the space for them to have opportunities beyond just being in the classroom.
This idea of what can teachers do for our school, I think it should be what schools can do to better a relationship with our teachers.
So it's important that teacher preparation and early career mentoring and supports are things that states, and in particular the District of Columbia, invests in long term.
Almost 90% of the teachers said they were passionate about teaching and that they wanted to stay.
And if teachers could plan on their future at these schools more than a year at a time, that would help make a stable environment and a trusting environment.
In order for me to continue the rest of the school year, I need to make sure that I'm in a good place in order to be in a good place for the kids.
I miss them every single day, and I feel guilty that I left. But I hope they know that I didn't leave them. I just left school.
Great. Thank you so much, Fraser, for the introductions, and to everyone who's able to join us for this session. As Fraser noted, my name is Alex Jew, and I am a policy analyst at the DC State Board of Education. And we are all really excited here today to talk to you about our teacher attrition survey that was administered earlier this year with results that came out in early March. And just share with you some of the data that we learned and found based on our survey. The format of today's session will be, we're going to go over some of the data using some visualizations and kind of talking through the narrative. We'll have a short question and answer period after that data review to answer any clarifying questions. And then we'll be breaking out into small breakout groups to kind of dig a little bit deeper into teacher attrition and the data and potential solutions when we think about it from both a data side as well as a policy side. But before we get to all of that, I did want to kind of share with everyone kind of the purpose that the State Board identified for why we decided to do this survey on teacher attrition. The State Board for some time had been hearing concerns from constituents at its public meetings. We had released some previous reports on teacher attrition. And for individuals who are not familiar with the DC State Board of Education, the State Board is the only elected body in the District of Columbia that's responsible for public education issues when it comes to our publicly educated students in the district. There is one member from each ward, and as Fraser noted, he is the ward representative for Ward 4. So members had been hearing a lot about teacher attrition being an issue. We had also recognized that the existing research on teacher attrition in the District of Columbia was really just focused on why effective teachers were leaving, and really seemed to prioritize only effective teachers. And so we wanted to dig a little bit deeper to get a better understanding about why all teachers were leaving and what some of the key drivers were. And so as I noted, the survey, we'll get into some of the methodology in a little bit, but we did survey teachers who departed classrooms over both school year 2017-18 and after school year 18-19. And as we said, we probed them for why they had left their classroom or their school or their LEA or their sector. So a little bit about the methodology before getting into the data. The survey was open for roughly 3 weeks. It was administered from December 30th, 2019 through January 17th, 2020, right after kind of the holidays and just over the new year. The survey was administered electronically via email, and it was distributed to just over 2,000 public school teachers in the District of Columbia. The survey was a little bit on the longer side. It was 72 questions, and it took about 9 minutes for each individual to complete. And as far as incentivizing participants, the survey was completely voluntary, and the State Board did not provide incentives to participate. After the survey, there were a series of follow-up discussions in both focus groups as well as interviews that allowed the State Board to have quantitative data, but also qualitative data related to teacher attrition in the district. And then lastly, as far as those 2,000 teachers that the survey was sent to, the information was procured through data sharing agreements with the Washington Teachers Union and 7 charter LEAs that represent about 29 individual charter schools in the District of Columbia. All the contact information that was received and the data itself was only transmitted between the research vendor that the State Board had partnered with and the sharing entity. So the State Board actually never received any of the contact information for the teachers. This is really important to note for a variety of reasons, because in the District of Columbia, there is no single publicly accessible list of teacher names or contact information. And so the process by which we actually procure this information was a little bit difficult, but we did successfully procure a list of over 2,000 recently departed teachers for our survey. The actual sample size of the survey, so we, as I noted, sent the survey electronically to over 2,000 teachers. We had a completion rate of about 12%, so about 12% of the folks who received the survey responded. And our research vendor had indicated that the response rate was in line with the appropriate kind of methodology and making sure that the survey was valid, if you will. Some demographic notes. I'm not going to go through everything here. We will provide this information with everybody else later. But the breakdown, about 3/4 of the folks were identified as female, another quarter as male, over 50% identified as Black, about 7% identified as Hispanic. Some other interesting things, there's a pretty even distribution across all of the kind of K through 12 grade bands. And then we did have a slightly larger percentage of traditional public school teachers responding to our survey at about 60%. And that was largely, I think, due to the fact that one of the partners that we had worked with on procuring data was the Washington Teachers Union, who does have the collective bargaining agreement with DC Public Schools. And so now what I'm going to do, as well as my colleague Darren, we're going to go through about 7 or 8 kind of key takeaways from the data. As I noted, we're going to go through this relatively quickly, but we will leave some time at the end of this section of the presentation for folks to ask clarifying questions about any of the information that's been shared on the data or the process or the methodology. And before we, as I said, before we go into our breakout sessions. And so the first thing that I'd like to share with everybody is, I think what everybody is probably thinking about from the survey, our big goal was trying to identify what were the primary drivers that teachers were leaving the classroom in the District of Columbia. And so there really were 2 big drivers on the quantitative side based on the survey information that we received. So DCPS teachers cited impact, or the teacher evaluation system, as really the primary reason for them leaving the classroom. And so about 1/4 of teachers actually cited a teacher evaluation as that primary driver. On the public charter school side of things, teachers cited work culture and workload as the primary reasons at about 20% each. And so, what we learned from this is that teacher evaluation was a huge thing, and is kind of a thing that one of the teachers noted as creating frustration and creating a polarizing environment. And then on the work culture and workload side, there were a lot of participants who described general culture and environment of schools, and this is across both sectors, not just in the public charter school sector, but as being in the trenches, surviving, and being at war. And so really the key takeaways from this visualization and this data point are teacher evaluation, workload, and work culture as being primary drivers. Some other key drivers, and this is more on the qualitative side of the data. As I mentioned at the beginning, there was a survey done, but after that we did follow up with qualitative focus groups as well as structured interviews. There were 3 focus groups, each included about 6 to 9 participants, and then we had 13 individual structured interviews following that. And so that was an opportunity for the research vendor to kind of dig deeper and probe on some of the quantitative aspects of the survey results. And so through that, we also found that there was a lack of support for teacher safety and mental health, and that was also on the student front too. And then also participants cited that there was tension and really strained relationships between teachers and their school leaders. And so a lack of support was felt by teachers from their administration. And then lastly, some teachers also cited issues with implementation of discipline in their schools. And I will actually pause right here because there is a really great question in the chat from Ashok Ali at Ed Intelligence. And this is a great clarifying question that I think does deserve some time to be answered right now. So thank you for asking it. And the question is, does your study differentiate between teachers quitting teaching job entirely and teachers moving to another school in the same state or the different state or other private schools? And so the answer to that question is yes. So there was differentiation that was done, and my colleague Darren will actually share with you all of the data points that were collected with respect to how our teachers were leaving. And so we did ask at the front end if teachers, quit voluntarily, and so that would have been through a resignation, or if they were forced to leave, whether it was through an early retirement package or they were fired. So there was some differentiation on the front end as to actual departure reason. And then on the end of the survey, we actually asked questions about, are you going to be moving to another school in the District of Columbia? Are you going to be moving to a school out of state? And so we are able to really kind of paint a picture and kind of create a narrative around, oh, maybe we want to find a better idea of teachers that were leaving their traditional public schools to go teach in a neighboring, jurisdiction, maybe Maryland or Virginia, in DC's case. What did it look like, and were there primary drivers that people were moving to those jurisdictions? And so our data does allow us to do that. We're not going to get to all of kind of the granular pieces of our information and data today, but that is something that it does allow us to do. And so we'll also, Ashok, be happy to share with you kind of the final report where you can kind of look at all of the different questions, all 72 questions, and the different data tables and things like that. And so if you wanted to explore it and kind of explore different narratives, you'd be welcome to. Simone, actually, I think I'm gonna skip this slide. Actually, no, I'm not gonna skip this slide. There's one thing I wanna highlight on this slide, is the last bullet, actually. And so issues related to facilities, compensation or benefits, curriculum, or parents or students were cited significantly less for why teachers departed the classroom in the District of Columbia. And the table above just really notes some of the very specific factors that folks selected as to their departure reason. I think this is the top 6. One thing to note is that individuals were able to pick 2 to 3 kind of major factors for why they departed. So they could have chosen a lack of professional support from administration, as well as not liking their teacher evaluation system, as well as not enough resources for discipline or behavior, or they could have just chosen one. There was a list of quite a few, I would say probably almost, I don't have the exact numbers, and so I don't want to misquote myself, but anywhere from maybe 60 to possibly 75 different choices that they could have chosen broken down. So now we can go to the next slide. Thank you, Simone. And this is another one, and I know Fraser likes to pop in on this, and so if he's still around, we'll have him pop in. But as Fraser noted, he was a lifelong teacher in the District of Columbia, and really had, I can speak to this, real passion for teaching. And so what this chart shows is that of the teachers surveyed, over 86% were passionate about teaching, but the majority did not feel they received the adequate support from their school or LEA to stay. There was this one teacher noted this constant anxiety, judgment, insecurity, and fear that kind of came with being observed in the classroom, and that, you know, they've thought of themselves as a bad teacher their whole life, but they had this immense passion from a young age. And so this chart, you'll see that there was a question that we asked respondents to respond to, and say, you know, do you agree or not agree with the statement, I am passionate about teaching? And you'll see that the majority, as we said, 86%, strongly agreed or agreed with the statement, regardless of how long they had been in the classroom. And even some teachers in their early years too, where we often see departure happening sooner, all saying, you know, I'm passionate about teaching, but I wasn't supported. And Fraser, I don't know if you have any anecdote or anything you might want to provide to add to that.
We don't have the time for me to share those anecdotes, but the thing about it is that what we hope that this survey will help with is to allow systems to provide mechanisms so that teachers don't even think about wanting to leave. When Alice was talking about the fact that compensation and or building structures were, if they taught in buildings that weren't brand new or whatever, it had nothing to do with their leaving. And what we want people to understand is that almost everyone starts teaching because they want to be teachers. And hopefully, now I didn't ever think when I was a beginning teacher that I was going to wind up teaching and I'm still teaching. So now it's over 50 years, but I gained a love of it quickly. And I had a lot of support from everyone in the building. And the problem, what we found with these teachers is that the support from the system and also from the local level buildings sometimes was lacking.
Thanks, Fraser. Another really good clarifying question in the chat that I do want to address now. Ramona Edlin asked, did effective and less effective teachers have the same reasons for leaving? We do have information on that. And so one of the things with the effectiveness piece is that due to the nature that there is not a publicly single source accessible database of all teacher contact information and teacher information, the effective rates actually had to be self-reported. And so there was not necessarily a kind of significant trend between why effective and less effective teachers were leaving. We did see that some who were less effective suggested not having enough support in the classroom or feeling burdened. But that would be my quick answer to that, and I would have to dig back into the report to come up with a more nuanced answer to your question, Ramona. But that is my on-the-spot answer. The next thing, still on the passion piece and kind of support piece, there really was not any encouragement or support for teachers to stay, and this was across the board. And so this chart really notes that about a third of teachers indicated that their school leadership did not encourage them to stay after they had indicated that they were going to be leaving their school. And that over 50%, almost 60% of teachers actually sought out help prior to them leaving for their primary departure reason. And so what this is showing is that, you know, to the passion piece, teachers want to be in the classroom. They're trying to stay in the classroom. They're trying to get the support that they need, but that they're not able to get that from whether it's their school, their LEA, or another source. This next chart just shows, again, kind of some other data points that were collected. We did ask folks to report whether or not they were a DC native, you know, to see that, to kind of think about, you know, folks who grew up in the District of Columbia might be more likely to stay. And one thing that we saw was that growing up in the district does not appear to have a significant effect on the number of years a teacher remains at their school. And also, DC natives don't necessarily appear to choose to teach in a school that is more or less diverse, whether it's around race, ethnicity, a cultural background, or socioeconomic background. And I know Fraser notes this, but this is, you know, it's also attributed to the fact that the district is rapidly gentrifying, and the people who are teaching in the district are coming from a variety of backgrounds and places and expertise now too.
One other thing too, Alex, is that when I first started teaching, the majority of the teachers were graduates of DC Teachers College, or a lot of them were. And for maybe the last 25 years, UDC's education department has undergone a lot of changes. UDC's education department now has a teacher component again, so hopefully that will help local teachers to stay in the district. But there's been a big change in the ages of teachers, and obviously people my age have retired by now, one would think. And but that was a big change in the makeup of the teachers in DC when we're talking about natives in the classroom. And it was always very helpful to be someone living in DC, to teaching in DC.
Thank you, Fraser. And now I'm going to turn over to my colleague, Darren Fleischer, to talk through some other components of the survey and the different data points that were actually collected.
Thank you, Alex. So in this in this graph, you can see 4 groups of teachers broken out by the level of students participants felt were at risk or from low-income households. This is one of those variables that were self-reported. For example, the all group means the teachers felt all the students they taught at their school were either at risk or from low-income households. For reasons why teachers left their school, and Alex alluded to this earlier, survey participants could select multiple reasons for the survey questions. For example, a single survey participant could have listed both curriculum and roles and responsibilities, or they could have chosen all 8 of those choices. When asking whether there was a difference between these 4 groups, all, most, about half, or a few, we found several different reasons why when comparing across these different groups. So looking at the first 2 groups, all or most of their students were at risk or low income, we found that they left for a variety of reasons, none standing out more than the rest. This might be interpreted signaling that their school experienced a variety of issues that pushed them out. For the groups of teachers that said that about half of their students were at risk or low income, some of the reasons for leaving became more apparent. Nearly half felt that climate, culture, or compensation were reasons they left their school. Unlike the other all or most groups above, facilities, school environment did not play a role in their decision to leave. And then lastly, looking at the last group of teachers, claiming that they only had a few students who were at risk or low income, showed a stark difference in the reason for leaving. A little over a third indicated that they left among other reasons because of issues around roles, responsibilities. Unlike the other groups, this last group also did not indicate leaving because of issues with students or parents, or because of issues with facilities or the school environment. Thank you. And I think we could move on to the next slide. in this next slide, we organized the different variables collected from the teacher retention survey into 4 categories. Some of these variables were used to create the graphs displayed earlier, while other variables were used to answer questions in the full report. They're broken out by teacher attribution, for example, birth year, race, ethnicity, by teacher experiences. So these are years teaching at school before departure, total years in teacher profession. The next category, departed school attributes. So this is the school they left. So for example, type of school. Was it a traditional, public, charter? What ward was the school in? And then the last category, current school environment attributes. And this speaks to Ashok's question from earlier, discussion of current job status or future plans. So what type of school are they teaching in now? And if not, what are they doing now?
Good afternoon.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Good afternoon. As Fraser shared, my name is Simone Wright, and I am a summer policy fellow with the State Board. Thank you, Fraser, Darren, and Alex, for sharing such insightful information from the 2020 DC Teacher Attrition Survey. Before moving into our small group discussions, we want to provide about 5 to 6 minutes for any clarifying questions that you may have. More so specifically around the information that was just shared. In terms of general questions, we will save those till later. So I'm going to turn it back over to Alex and Darren to address any questions that may be coming up in the chat box, or if anyone would like to raise their hand and come off of mute to also ask questions as well. Ashok from Ed Intelligence has a question. Would you like to come off mute and ask that question?
Hello, everyone. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, good afternoon. So, I worked on PMF and with PCSU from 2010 to 13. And one thing, this study is pretty good. And then what I'm trying to understand now is within that roles and responsibilities section, right, where you said that the teachers are leaving because of different roles and responsibilities. And oftentimes, with some of my prior experience working with the schools, I've seen their frustration, especially they are wearing multiple hats, right? There are going to be different data validation timelines. There are compliance requirements to meet. And within that roles and responsibilities also, we can literally break it down into 2, 3, 4, 5 subgroups, right? And then my question is, have you looked into that details, drilling down further into which particular roles and responsibilities is contributing more towards their frustration and then prompting them to leave school? Have you looked into in that detail?
Ashok, I'll attempt to answer that question. And so we have not drilled down too much into that detail. I think one of the, I think though the survey was valid and our vendor affirmed its validity, we haven't been able to get that granular due to an N size. And so these questions about current workplace or future workplace were also voluntary. And so not everybody was required to answer them. And so we don't have the full sample size for folks who answered those questions. And so to get as granular, we weren't able to. But really largely what we did, and I'm trying to find the exact question right now in my notes. And if you bear with me 1 second, I will share that with you. So yeah, as far as like specificity goes, really what we did was when we asked about if they were teaching in a school, it was really just around sector. And so not necessarily around specific role within that sector. And so, are they back in a traditional public school? Are they in a charter school? Are they in an alternative school? Are they in a private school or something other? We did also ask, whether or not, to your question earlier, Ashok, whether they're inside or outside of DC, or possibly even in the DC metro area. And then we also asked kind of for some folks, a lot of people see teaching and early departure of teaching kind of as a springboard into other types of education related roles. And so we wanted to probe that as well too, to see if folks were leaving the teaching profession to seek out a different type of role, but in the education space. And those are really kind of the big buckets that we addressed. We weren't really able to get any more granular than specific disciplines or specific roles in those types of organizations or spaces.
Okay, thank you.
I think one thing too, when you're talking about the impact and the impact that the impact has on the teachers, a lot of teachers when I was teaching were very much involved with the school, with extracurricular activities, coaching, doing tutoring and all these other things, but those things were not appreciated on the impact evaluation. And I think that most teachers leave the system because they don't feel as though they're appreciated. And I think that that was one of the reasons why many of them mentioned the evaluation system as not being whole in its evaluation, that it was very data-driven rather than soul-driven.
Yep, that answered my question. Thank you. That's helpful.
And then, Anne, I do see your question, and just to be cognizant of time, I'm going to give a quick answer, and then we could address it at another time. The information on like issues with discipline was largely observed in the qualitative process of the survey or the following the survey, so in the focus groups and the interviews. And so the report itself actually has not necessarily transcripts, but really great summaries of the 3 focus groups, as well as the 13 structured interviews with key observations that were identified from there. And in there's some information related to kind of more specific discipline pieces, but I couldn't point to any off the top of my head. And then let's see here. Kayla Green asked, in your survey results or focus groups, did you uncover what specific supports teachers felt they needed in order to perform their roles and responsibilities? Kayla, I think that's a great question. One might argue that that is also kind of a silver, the $1 million question, if you will. What are those roles or what are the supports that teachers actually need to be successful? And that I think is something that, as we break out into our small groups, we can kind of further probe. But it really did vary across the board, from professional development things to mentorship, to recognition of work-life balance, variety of things across sectors and grade bands and spaces. Simone, would you like to transition us?
Sure. Thank you, Alex, for being so responsive to our participants. As I stated earlier, we are about to transition to small group discussion time, where we probably will be in groups of about 4 to 5 people. I am going to give you all about 60 seconds to review the outcomes for this time. Maybe not 60 seconds, but 45. You will have 15 to 20 minutes to have a discussion around these outcomes shared above on the screen. When we return, you will need a speaker to share out a summary of the discussion that you had in your small groups and some potential next steps, either for the state board or even for your group as leaders in the space. Before we transition into small groups, I want to take a moment to highlight some norms for our discussion time. And the goal is to use these norms so we can maximize the brief 15 or 20 minutes that we have to start to dig into some of the things that Alex and Darren shared. I believe Darren is about to send you off into a small group world. We will come back together at 2:05.
Hi, Preeti and Kayla, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Great.
I'm recording this, so I might participate through the chat.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you, Preeti. I'm going to share my screen right now, and we're just going to have kind of a small group discussion related to my presentation. So if you just give me 1 second, I'm going to pull up my stuff. So as Simone mentioned, we're going to do some small group discussion on the survey. And we have about 15 or 20 minutes to do this. And so before we do that, I wanted to just see if any folks in this group had any additional questions. I know, Kayla, you had asked one in the chat. Wanted to see if anybody else had any specific questions either.
All right, I'm just going to talk. It's just me on the recording. So I was wondering, I saw your stats on like how many individuals that were surveyed were from DC, and I just wanted to know the N size. I didn't see like a total N of the number that were from DC, and maybe I just missed it.
So everybody who was surveyed was a DC public school teacher.
Like homegrown or like a resident.
Oh, homegrown.
Yeah.
So yes, that was not shared with you, and I can find that information for you right now as I look at the full thing. So yeah, that's.
And I know that this was really focused on like why teachers leave, but like I'm really focused on like what makes them stay. And like how, right, like how can teachers feel supported? And I honestly, like, so I used to work for a teacher residency program. And so I feel like in that first 3 years of being a teacher, like there's a lot of support that's needed that I don't necessarily feel like if you don't have a program to support you that's provided. And I just don't think that those supports are available in schools. And so I'm curious about like what that looks like in terms of mentorship and support.
Yeah, that's a really great question, Preeti.
Yeah, to that point, I think that's kind of where my question was coming from is what systems of support do teachers need? And I think specifically through the lens of professional development, because teachers do have that time allocated to them, and that is the time they are supposed to be supported. So what's actually supposed to be happening during that time to help create systems or create the space for mentorship? Like what is it that they feel like they're missing that would keep them?
Yeah. And so I think one of the things, and I'll address Kayla's question first, was there are some specific things that are listed in the qualitative portions of our study with respect to what people explicitly stated. You know, some people more so on the traditional public school side of things recognize that some of the professional developments were not as structured isn't the right word. Were not as appropriate for them and for their particular context, and that they felt very general and kind of like a top-down kind of, this is the PD that you're going to be taking right now, and whether or not it was actually applicable and address particular sports, more of kind of like a blanket approach to PD.
And people don't really get choice in the PD that they get, right? Like you can't choose what you want to do.
Yeah, and I think some folks stress this idea of like with respect to PD, you know, could, and I think, and I'm trying to remember this, I don't remember it completely, but could someone, you know, decide to shadow in a particular classroom, right? You know, because they know that that teacher is an expert teacher in their particular field. And like, could they use, to Kayla's question of like, yes, teachers are allocated, you know, professional development time. Could they choose to use their 10 hours of PD time for the quarter to do that? Could they kind of self-direct their PD? And again, it totally varies. But as let me go to the next slide because I think we're already going to be behind. And Preeti, I did not forget about your DC question. I will get it to you.
It's fine. I can wait. I feel like if other people have things they want to share.
But yeah, so the first part we're doing right now is kind of sharing the initial reactions to the teacher attrition survey data, asking kind of clarifying questions. The next question really is, wanted to get folks' thought, and I think there has been some of this already, around sharing anything that you might feel is missing from the data or kind of gaps, if you will, and what people's thoughts are maybe on that front.
I know you said something about in the past you mostly surveyed, or the focus was on teachers who were highly effective or effective leaving the district, and that recently you shifted focus to also include like all teachers who were leaving the the profession. So I'm curious to know, like, to see how that relates to the systems of support that they said they needed, or why they said they were leaving, like how that correlates perhaps with their rating.
Yeah, and so just one clarifying question.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as the existing research on effective teachers leaving the classroom, that is something that was always done by DC public schools. And so that is actually information that the state board did not do, but is kind of like the direction that most kind of LEAs are thinking about teacher attrition is like, we really just want to make sure our effective teachers are staying. We need to probe, why have they left? What can we do to make sure effective teachers are leaving? Where I think Fraser, Dr. O'Leary, has said this before, that you know, one of the important things is, yes, ensuring our effective teachers are staying, but also ensuring that teachers who want to be teachers and who are passionate about the profession but might need additional supports, you know, what can be done to help them grow and learn. And they may not be rated as effective or highly effective at the beginning. And so also probing, you know, why and what can be done there. Anything else? I know, Kayla, that wasn't really a good answer for your question. I think we have 10 minutes left in our small groups, that's why. And so just thinking about the next 10 minutes, I think we can kind of navigate this. We don't have to do everything in this discussion. But one is, we can review some best practices for addressing teacher attrition. And we have a slide that just has some that were, that's in the research based on things from like places like the Learning Policy Institute. So we could go to that slide and review that. We could reflect on this prompt question, thinking about, you know, hey, Lisa, you know, the roles that you are in and your realm of influence. What could you do to kind of shift the narrative or shift what you heard about the state board and teacher attrition in the district? What could you do to kind of influence or change things? And then, or we could try to do both. So I don't know if, you know, 3 or 4, if we want to try to prioritize one of those first, and then if we have time, we can go to the other, or what folks might think would be best.
I'm open to either. I just wasn't sure if Joanna or Lisa have any thoughts, or they have any preference about what we talk about.
Okay. So I'm going to suggest that we do number 4, just because I think it's a more interesting question. And so the question is, and we can do a round robin, so like a minute per person. What is something within your realm of influence that could shift what you just heard from the state board around teacher attrition in the district?
I can start. So my current role is as an instructional coach in DC, at a DC public school. And so within that realm of influence, that's why I'm so intrigued by like what happens during that professional development time, because I often feel like there's this like admin are pitted against teachers and vice versa, whereas like I navigate a space between those two, and oftentimes I wonder how teachers can form their own PLCs to help drive their own professional development that is just like overseen by admin or like okayed by admin, you know, instead of relying like so heavily on the administration for that professional development, actually being leaders of their professional development. So that's, I think, creating that PLC space, but that also requires like systems and structures, which I think admin can help to create and coaches can help to create, so that teachers' roles and responsibilities are not about creating those system trackers, not about collecting, they just have to like worry about their role as teachers in collecting data that influences their classroom, and that data can speak to the professional development that they need. To that point about differentiation.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, do you feel like in your role as an instructional coach that you have the ability and authority to actually allow for that differentiation, or is that something that you still would need from your superiors?
I do have the ability to create coaching plans for each person. I think where it gets interesting is how every school has their comprehensive school plan. And so the coaching plans have to be aligned to this comprehensive school plan. Also where it gets interesting is that the amount of training that coaches go through or don't. Because attrition is so high, oftentimes I feel like those positions are being filled and they never get the day one training. They just jump in where, so like speaking to my own experience, like I was thrust into this position and I didn't get the day one training, how to do this protocol. It was mostly up to me to kind of figure that out and navigate that. So yes, there is the freedom for that. However, I'm not sure that the expertise is always present.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Others, Preeti, Lisa?
So Alex, I think Joanna is having some trouble with sound.
Okay.
So she's been sending some questions and comments through the chat box to me. So I think this might be going back a little bit, so I don't want to take us too off track, but she did have a question about like the study including administrator performance, supervision, and feedback, if that was something you looked into.
Okay.
And then I think that I'm just going to have her kind of message either me or you. If you can see them in the chat, she might have sent them directly to you.
So unfortunately, because I'm screen sharing, I don't have the chat window open right
I can
now.
read them out if you.
So that would be great, but I will answer the first question that Joanna asked. So related to kind of the administrative evaluation piece, really the only evaluative criteria that was looked at in our survey was impact scores, or teacher evaluation scores, and that largely is across our DC public schools. And so we asked folks just to self-report whether they were most recently rated as, ineffective or highly effective, or any of the three in between. But that was pretty much the extent to the evaluative criteria that we asked for.
Also, Alex, just so you know, 30-minute warning.
30-second warning?
30-minute warning for the session.
Oh, yes, I did know that. I have my
great.
timer. Yeah, we're good. We're actually surprisingly right on time, which is great. So any other questions that Joanna had in the chat, or do you want to read off?
Yeah. I think her comment was like she has good experience at retaining teachers when administrators are more involved and provide feedback. I'm going to agree with that. I think having that feedback, and also I think from my experience working with teachers, like if teachers have an idea or they want to try something new, getting that support that'll help those students, like getting that support to do it, really helps you feel like you have, some growth and can try new things. I think that's why she was asking more about administrators as leaders than managers, to kind of think about that feedback kind of experience.
Yeah, and I guess, question that I have, the folks that we surveyed were pretty much just like teachers and folks in the classroom. And so not necessarily the folks that were, and if that's getting at Joanna's question, maybe not necessarily the folks that are the leaders of schools, but really, the workhorses, the people who are doing the jobs of making sure that everyone in the District of Columbia is getting the best education that they can.
I think maybe that's a good next step, like getting a sense of, supervisors and administrators, like what are you doing to keep your teachers? How are you, and seeing who's retaining more based on data and comparing that. I don't know. Yeah,
no, I think that's super helpful. Thank you so much. And so I know we are getting ready to close, and Joanna, since she's having audio issues and Kayla had to jump early, we do need someone to report out. And so I'm looking to you, Preeti, unless Lisa would, but I haven't heard from Lisa yet. And so
she might be having audio issues. I don't know.
She could be having audio issues as well.
Okay, let me read one more comment from Joanna. So she also mentioned that administrators sometimes do not have like a real understanding of what's going on in the classroom, and so they don't always support teachers in the way that they need. I would kind of agree with that too. I'm happy to report out. Maybe we can summarize what I should say.
Yeah, for sure. That would be great. And so I think the big things would just be, kind of some of the observations that you all made about the data, and what some of these gaps were. So the administrator piece that was just discussed, Kayla's information around, roles and responsibilities, and what actually are those supports that teachers are looking for, not necessarily tangible, but the actual list of supports that they need to be able to do their roles and responsibilities. And I really liked Kayla's anecdote about her being this instructional coach, and she kind of sits in this, medium between not being a teacher, but having influence over teachers, but not actually being an administrator. And I really appreciated her response to thinking about her realm of influence. And so how can we leverage more experiences like that? Things like that. I don't think it needs to be a terribly lengthy report out by any means. And I appreciate your engagement.
No problem. I just need to write it down because right now my brain is all over the place.
I can only imagine, Preeti.
Great. Okay. I can do that. Joanna or Lisa, is there anything else that you would like me to share? Feel free to use the chat. All right, well, I will plan to share that.
So at the beginning of this session, we shared 3 major goals for this presentation. Interpret and analyze the DC State Board's teacher attrition survey data and its findings, develop a narrative about why teachers are leaving their classrooms, schools, and/or sector in the district, brainstorm and discuss next steps and solutions to address address teacher attrition in the district. This is the part of the session where we will be asking group representatives and individuals to share their thoughts based on the data and narrative presented. Let's start with the group representatives. I will call on each of you to share on your group's reaction to the study, data you felt was missing from the study or should be further explored, and lastly, 2 or 3 ways to address teacher attrition in DC. So I'll be calling on group representatives. Let's start with group 1. Could you raise your hand if you're the group representative for group 1?
It's me, Darren. I'm going to shout for our group. We had some technical issues, so I was able to do that. So for our group's reaction to the study, I think people were really thinking about that administrator relationship and kind of roles and responsibilities, like what supports are teachers getting, as well as in that first few years as a teacher, what support and training and PD are they getting to kind of help them in that, next step in their educational career. And I think that Alex put in the question, I was curious about, a little bit about the homegrown student or the teachers and what that data looked like. And I think people were also wondering a little bit about the administrators and kind of feedback that they provide and what that looks like in terms of data and support. And then ways to address teacher attrition. We had one individual that was an instructional coach. So she was just talking a little bit about leveraging roles and experiences to kind of support teachers. And then we had another individual that was a principal, and she mentioned that she does a pretty good job of retaining teachers. About 80% of her teachers she's able to retain, and she feels that the other 20% leave because of better opportunities. And she feels that people, as they get more comfortable and have a connection between instruction, support, and feedback, they're more likely to stay.
Thank you, Preeti. From group 2, can you raise your hand?
So our reaction to this study from our group was that we weren't really surprised by the data. We kind of agreed with it. For data that we felt was missing, I think that of course there were always things that could have been explored a little bit further. We all had kind of some additional questions about, well, why could have this been this way? What could have better supported why the numbers were for this way? But then for ways to address teacher attrition, one of the commonalities that we had in discussing was communication, especially communication in terms of expectations very early on seemed to have a big effect, especially with teachers incoming to a school for the first time, whether or not they're new teachers or new teachers to a specific location. Their expectations of what things may be like when they start teaching may be completely different from what they actually experience once they're in the classroom, and that can kind of set things off on the wrong foot. So definitely having different resources to kind of open up the communication for those teachers, especially in the beginning of the year, as well as resources for leadership and administration to better facilitate a more positive environment for all staff members and students throughout the year. Those were some of the things that we discussed.
Great, thank you. And then the last group, the group with Fraser. Could we have a group representative share out maybe about 2 minutes of what your group shared?
All right, so our group started with me talking about my personal observation of the school, a DC public charter school that I worked, that changed 3 principals in less than 4 years. And so I started to mention that the leadership reshuffle is a big problem that might have contributed to the teacher retention issues. And Carla jumped in to say she's very interested in data collection and survey process throughout this activity. That DC has its rules in place that might make it difficult to inform policy. And so her biggest or primary takeaway is to see the difference between DCPS and DC charter school, that some DCPS teachers might find the charter school teachers might be highly assessed compared to the DCPS teachers. And Miranda mentioned her qualitative side, saying schools are not encouraging teachers to stay, so I think it's a problem with the school culture. And Fraser mentioned that the current survey is 6-month-old, and he's expecting there might be a smaller data in August due to the remote learning and teaching. And also we have a fact that with over 2,000 requests, we collect less than 15% of the results from teachers, but still it is like a true picture, and he looks forward to more data coming from teachers. But the churns of leadership is a bigger issue than teacher retention issues. And Ashok mentioned about the impact score, saying that there should be a motivational energy within the system to encourage more teachers to stay. When Fraser mentioned the Teacher Appreciation Week and certain cultural building, and apparently this remote teaching for 4 months is bringing more appreciation to teachers, and he's advocating more appreciation methods for teachers to keep them, and a better evaluation to generate better data. And he also observed that there's a lack of mentors for newer and younger teachers to encourage them to stay. And Darren is navigating us to put thoughts on the variables missing. And so the data people like Ashok and Carla both mentioned about data access. The Carla said data literacy gap is a real issue, that they might have spent more time on compliance. So really alarming to say, how are we gonna weigh student growth in at-risk population? when the school administration spends all their focus on compliance. And so Fraser ended the discussion with the impact. Teachers with lower rating were not given help to improve their performance. It's a real problem when we struggle to make a better teacher in the current system.
Wow. We had the right person.
Great, thank you so much. Two other questions that we would have liked to get to is thinking about your role in education. How will you commit to addressing teacher attrition in the district, your sector, your LEA, or your school? And two, what actions or approaches might the state board take to mitigate future teacher attrition? These are two things that maybe all of you can keep in mind, and maybe we can address it later at the Q&A. But we are going to move on to our next slide.
And in this next slide, as we're closing out, we just wanted to share. So after the survey was done and the state board produced a report on it and a memo that was released in March, the state board also issued these 5 kind of recommendations. And so we just wanted to share those with everyone with respect to what the state board's thinking was in early March. To Group 3's point and to Fraser's comment, a lot has changed since March 2020. And so recommendations and kind of the way we're thinking about school has changed. But really the first one was adopting the Statewide Educational Data Warehouse Amendment Act. And so the state board has, legislation, if you will, before DC Council that would create a robust, publicly kind of single-sourced teacher database. 2 is on developing mentor programs for teachers at schools. That we see that there's immense value in teacher mentorship. 3 was considering these findings in the DCPS redesign of their teacher evaluation system impact. We do currently know and understand that Chancellor Lewis Farabee is working, not necessarily working, but I think that the American University's School of Education is working to better understand DCPS's impact system and what could be done to improve it. And then number 4 is improving school culture and teacher workload. Again, this is really broad and general, and I think there's a lot that can be unpacked here with what we really need to do to ensure supports are there and culture and workload are improved. And then the last thing does get to some of the administrative concerns and issues that were raised at today's session around school level leadership. And so we have a suggestion for the creation of a statewide professional development program for school level leadership when we think about what it means to be an effective school leader and creating a good cohort of teachers at your school.